Hi, Dr. Ruth Anderson here with Enlightened World Network. I am so excited today. For Author's Corner, we have Alan Steinfeld, and he compiled and has a couple of chapters in Making Contact, Preparing for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence. And I had the profound opportunity to sit with Alan in Sedona last week, and we had a great conversation. And I'm really hoping to just kind of pick up from where we left off. But first of all, Alan is a writer, a public speaker, a television talk show host, and an event coordinator. His show is New Realities. It's a popular YouTube and cable offering. So excited to have you here, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. It's great to see you again.
So, question. I'm just going to dive right in.
Sure.
We used to call them UFOs. Unidentified flying object. And the term I'm hearing kicked around is UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenons. Why are they changing what we call them?
That is a really good question. So I just want to say the book I compiled is an overview of, I would guess, the last 75 years of where we've been since Roswell and all the kind of negative stuff that's been out there, the government secrecies. So the government has now decided that they want to talk about this, or part of it. And they thought it would be good to have a rebranding campaign. You know, UFOs have gotten weird. And I mean, at least it's replaced the term flying saucer, which was big, I guess, in the 50s and 60s, flying saucer. And then UFOs, which means unidentified flying objects. So the government, based on some of the work done in Britain and UK, started to call these objects phenomena. I mean, UAP means unexplained aerial phenomena. So we're going from object to phenomena, basically. So what does that mean? That means that this is more than just things visiting us from outer space. There's a whole consciousness, phenomenological aspect to this presence. It means some people say actually seeing these objects can affect your consciousness. It can open you up. It can freak you out. It can change your mind. It can shift your worldview. And these objects do have, not that's just from our side, the objects also have an impact from their side on our thinking. It can affect us. So the government, in a little hint of their disclosing narrative, have gone, and I think in a sensible way, from calling these just objects to saying that there's a whole other level that's happening with these things. It's more than just what we're calling them. And phenomena, it's really an ongoing discovery. If once you call something an object, you think you know what it is. But if it's a phenomena, it's more undefinable, which is more, I think, closer to the truth of what we really know about these things. It's something more than what we've been told. And it's something more than, I think, what the government is willing to tell us and what they are able to understand.
So do you think that I'm going to read something out of the book here. Yeah. So former Air Force officer and UFO advocate Robert Hastings theorizes that the steady approach on the part of the ET intelligence is for slow and mitigated acceptance of otherworldly beings into our fragile notions of reality. And he says, I'm of the opinion that whoever they are, they have enough sense to know that if they interject themselves into our reality in one fell swoop, there could be very dire repercussions. I mean, think any of the B-rated movies about ETs, right? Whereas on the other hand, if they engage in an on-again, off-again, cat and mouse behavior, that allows a slow psychological conditioning of humankind to their reality and to the presence of themselves. Then, when open contact, if that indeed is in the cards, occurs, there will be far less trauma.
Exactly. This is the strategy I think not only are the UFOs, UAPs doing, but I think it's what the government is doing. They're giving us slow leaks. They're saying, oh, here's some footage. Then it gives us time to integrate this into a worldview, because it's quite shocking for some people, not for us maybe, but for the world to be different than we've been told it is. So, we are now getting accustomed through all the news stories that maybe there's something else going on, and people will feel a little more comfortable with this idea. Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, said truth passes through three stages. First, it's ignored, then it's ridiculed, and then it becomes self-evident. We're kind of going beyond the ridicule phase, but we're not quite into the self-evident phase. But it in maybe 10 years, 20 years, this will become a reality that's like, oh, of course. How could we ever have thought that the earth was flat, or that, the earth was the center of the universe? How could we ever have thought that? And so this is the next level of that revelation. How could we ever have thought that we were the only creatures, or life was only existing on Earth? It seems very narcissistic, egocentric. It's just another level of the illusion being revealed, to that it's there's something more. And so this is the time we're in. We're in a really, I think, major threshold of change and possibility, because we are making contact, or they're making contact with us. So
Right. So intriguing. And then just one other part. Grant
yes.
Cameron, who's the author of The Theory Wow, said, if someone sees a UFO, it is not by chance. Every sighting and contact experience is intentionally planned.
I think so. Like maybe 10 years ago, if you saw a UFO, it's like, oh, you saw something. But if you saw it twice, then you're making it up. That's how people used to think it. But now we're seeing that people have lifelong sightings of UFOs. Somehow, in Grant's essay, A Theory of Wow, he says the viewer is connected to the phenomena. If you've seen a UFO, somehow your consciousness, whether you're ready for it or not, is connected to what's out there. We are entangled in this phenomenon. So it's a two-way street, making contact. It's up to us, it's up to them, it's about expansion. But like I said, this is a phenomena that calls on us to be more aware, to open up to other possibilities, and to start to shift our worldview to include these other beings. It's just for me and you, when our worldview gets shaken up, when the world is not what we thought it is. And I don't want to get into your story, but suddenly it's like, wow, it's so enlivening. I think for some people who live in a very small box, like my mother, you know, she doesn't want to know about this stuff. It's like, and for other people who are very maybe insecure about their reality, if something shakes it up, they tend to be afraid, or they tend to feel unstable in their own self-identification, because I always say reality is more solid than the ground beneath your feet. And when that level of what we thought was real is disturbed, people don't know who they are. They don't know what's possible. There's a tendency, if they don't expand into the phenomena, then there's a tendency to go into fear or I guess almost trauma, I would say. Some people are traumatized when suddenly, and that's why a lot of people aren't willing to make that shift, because they they're holding on to their possessions and onto their partners, onto what they want and their security, their social security, meaning that, they're all socially secure together, that it's scary to suddenly walk into a new world. So even mentioning UFOs or even suggesting that something else exists, even though the government has now said, yes, they exist, people still have their head in the sand. And that's okay. They can live there. But for me, I think this is the most exciting time on planet Earth for humans, that where we're finally about to meet the other in a very public way. And I think this is a great time. It's so much is possible when that happens.
Right. And you're right. I think it is fear that keeps people closed.
But what are people afraid of really when you say fear? I'm just curious. What do you think they're afraid of?
Yeah, I think it's shocking their reality. It was like before COVID, we all kind of knew how things worked. And then COVID happened and just totally unraveled what everybody thought was their reality. And I think it's similar to that.
I think it is too. And that's just maybe on some level a preparation for this next thing that's coming along. Not that it was purposely that, maybe it was, but it's like you call your network Enlightened World. The person who wakes up to an enlightened world is not the same person. That the seeker is not the finder, basically, So if you're seeking something, a greater mind, you have to be able to embrace that in order to be more enlightened. I think enlightenment is an ongoing process. This is another level of waking up to the greater consciousness. Whoever these beings are, whatever you want to call these objects, there's the reality that there's something more than our small little corner of the universe. And I think that is really a public enlightened world that we're coming into. If we just think it's the same old with, mass shootings and starvations and holocausts, and which is awful that those things have happened, but maybe this is the ending of that time. Maybe we can say that if we can come together as a unified consciousness, then we can start to build on a foundation where we can create an enlightened world, because we see we're more like each other than we are different. And meeting the other may put that in perspective, but it also will open us up to a renaissance of thinking, of technology, of free energy. Obviously, these craft are not filling up their gas tank to get here, and they're able to stop and hover and lift and turn, and all these things that the Navy has now documented these things can do. So they're using a level of physics we have yet to understand, because like all things, we're just looking at a very small, narrow window on possibilities, and the world is full of infinite possibilities, just like humans are full of infinite possibilities. So I think it also wakes us up to that fact that there's more to us as human beings, that we're taught in the Darwinian, Newtonian, Cartesian, mechanistic, whatever words you want to call the old world realities, that life is an anomaly in a universe. Basically, we're living in a dead universe. This is the old world view, where what's happened on Earth is like a freak of nature. It couldn't possibly happen, and the odds of life emerging here was pretty amazing. But that doesn't fit into a worldview that says, no, maybe there's life everywhere. Maybe life is an emergent property of creation itself. And if that is true, then I think we give more value to we're no longer like freaks. We're part of a greater cosmos that incorporates life. The universe is not dead. If you think it's dead, then you go along with Sigmund Freud's death wish, where he says things have a want to return to their original formation. So if we come from a dead world, the death wish is to return to that place of non-living. But if you think that the world has been created because life is the reverse of entropy, and life is a fundamental to the universe itself, and maybe we descended from a higher level, then I think we yearn to go back to that higher level, which is what the spiritual world has always kind of professed, that there's a greater reality that has descended and created this form, not in a creationist kind of worldview, but more as our minds and our spirit are part of a bigger picture of possibilities.
Yep. So, Alan, let's get a little gritty here.
Sure, whatever you want.
1987.
Yes.
You and two friends traveling across the country go spend the night in the back of the van.
Right.
In a field.
Right.
Where were you? What state?
I was in Nebraska. We were driving along Route 80 from Oregon. We left the Oregon Country Fair, I think, a day or two before, and we were going east to the East Coast, and where I live, and this girlfriend of mine. There was someone driving us, but it was me and my girlfriend in the back of this fold-out bed. And so we stop by this kind of deserted canal, and we just kind of pass out. We just kind of feel like we are suspended in frozen in animation, that like the world had stopped. And we're in this position where, it gets really strange, where like everything else is silent and we're just in this other reality. So what else can I say about that? Time had stopped. We kind of fall asleep. Time has stopped. And we wake up in the morning as if we're in the same position we went to sleep in. And who even remembers that? But I had this mark on the back of my leg, which, I mean, what I'm about to say is not any different than what hundreds of thousands of other people have gone through as what has been called abduction. So, there's a lot more dramatic stories than mine, but yeah.
Right. But it's a dramatic story for you.
I think it is. That sucked me down the rabbit hole. It's like, yeah, I was into science fiction. I was into Star Trek, and but it was still out there. So it's still hard for me to believe that this thing had happened, because to say the truth, it doesn't happen in this level of reality. So it's as if, you have a piece of film and you this other thing happens, and this film is then cut, that time frame is cut out and it's spliced back together. And so where is this missing time frame? It's not in this world. So my theory, and I write about this, when these ETs appear in our reality, they distort our field of consciousness. Mm-hmm. Like, have you ever been around like a really high master, like Amma? If you sit in the audience with Amma, the hugging saint, you start to have these higher thoughts. At least I do, because she is on that higher level and you're picking up these thoughts. So the opposite or similar is true of these ETs. Their thought field is so different than our thought reality that it's distorting to our field. So you automatically shift consciousness because we're not lucid enough to stay aware in these other states. You can practice lucidity, and I think that's one way to prepare for meeting the other, practicing being aware, not in drug-induced states, but more in dreamlike states. So that's the sort of reality that we can perceive them in. It's because just imagine a being whose thoughts are so different, you can't even tune into them psychically without losing awareness of your own natural sense of being. And that's what happens, I feel. So that's why it's sort of traumatic, but not intentionally traumatic. It's just that they calibrate their frequency of being. It's like trying to get Wi-Fi on an AM radio. You just don't have the bandwidth. Right. Even though on another level, on a soul level, I think they are not greater than us. They're not any more special. They're not any, in a way, more evolved. Yes, they're more intelligent. They're more technically, but on the deep sense of self, if you can go to that deeper place of self, then you can meet them beyond the personality, because the personality is sort of evaporated, in my experience, in the presence of these beings. So I had to be regressed to that moment. And in that hypnotic regression, or semi-hypnotic, it wasn't like I was actually remembering what was happening, because when trauma happens, in any trauma, there's a part of a disassociation, right? So it's like, and that's, so the personality is disassociated from the event. That's like really, so the personality can't remember because it didn't happen to the personality. So in this regression, it's like I am sort of remembering, and the images came to me of these beings that were actually, what I saw was faceless. They had no features. They had like a head, but there was more and I don't know if that's true or that's just how my mind substituted what they are, because maybe what they really looked like was, I don't think they were any scarier than what we see now as ETs, but to have them show up in your world, like even it does it's shocking, you know? So like, yes, we see movies and people can wear masks, but when you're in the presence of this thing, whatever these things are, it's hard to adjust, because I'm looking at you, I met you, you're a human being, you eat, you drink, you sleep, you know, you do everything. But when you meet even people who are strange, you know, who maybe are a little off, there's something like just something in your body gets alerted that this is not normal. So that's what happens in this extreme. So people can wear masks of these creatures, but it's not the same when you're really in the presence. And that's the big deal, I think. That is meeting the other in a lucid enough state to stand on your own sense of self, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It makes perfect sense.
It does. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't make sense to me. So many abduction stories. And do people actually still use the word abduction? Is that the preferred term?
Well, there's many levels. I think there's less abductions in the sense, because abductions means you're sort of taken against your will. And, but now the term is more experiencer or contactee, because I think, and maybe I'm not right about this, but the abductions that were occurring in the 80s and 90s, and actually starting in the 60s with Betty and Barney Hill. They were an interracial couple driving from Montreal to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There was 4 hours of missing time. I think we're at another level where we are able to meet these beings on a different level. So it's not as traumatic if they appear and you're getting telepathic information from these beings. So I think the word now is contactee, because it seems like people are not being taken against their will and for genetic experiments. At least that's not what I'm aware of. And there's more of an exchange. So there's been an evolution to the phenomena.
I get that.
I think so. I don't know. Some people still claim to be abducted, but I haven't met any recent abductees. I think it's much more contactees.
Yeah, I dated somebody who could tell me about 2 different times that he had been abducted, and his was truly abducted. He had no intention of going, and both times he lost time, and which I think is really common, as you were saying. And both times he felt really sexually violated when he was done.
There is a sexual component because I think they are taking sperm. I think they took sperm from me. Yeah. Grant Cameron says if it's just one lifetime and that's all there is, and there's no other lifetimes, then it's abduction. But if there's many lifetimes and you've made a possible agreement for this to happen in some level of consciousness, and maybe it's traumatic to the personality, but not to the greater consciousness that's aware, then it's all fine. I'm not saying that's true. I don't know if that's true, but that's just one thing, like we all make agreements, maybe on other levels. We made an agreement to meet whenever we met and from another level. And there's, but that, that doesn't excuse the awful things that of course happen to people, like saying, oh, it's an agreement, you can't. Right. But so that's a little iffy, I think. But I think if you look at what's called the free document, where 4,000 abductees were surveyed, the most of them, I say 90%, say it was traumatic at first, but eventually there was an integration where it was a really positive, eye-opening experience. Mm-hmm. Like for me, yes, it was traumatic, but it gave me purpose, I have to say, the purpose to figure out what happened to me and then to share this with the world in this book and to maybe prepare people so they're not traumatized for what will be coming, what is coming, what's arriving now. So, Joe Dispenza in the introduction to the book, I quote him and says, knowledge gives people a prelude to experience. If you don't have knowledge, you can't qualify the experience. So what I'm giving people in this book is knowledge of what's happening so they aren't traumatized. So they, the people who had those experiences in the 80s and 90s, and people who, like John Mack writes about, the Harvard psychiatrist. John Mack's work?
I don't.
He was a psychiatrist working as a professor at Harvard, at the Harvard Medical School of Psychiatry. And he started to talk to these people, which he thought, of course, must be crazy to claim abductions. And then after meeting 200 of these people with similar but not exact stories, he says, you know what? These people are not any crazier than anyone else. And they're actually more sane. They just have this strange phenomena that they claim to happen. And he said, I can't doubt their experiences. They're very real, legitimate. They don't want publicity. They don't want, to even talk about these things. Most people, John would say, want to be told they're crazy because they've had these experiences. And he sort of says, I have good news and bad news for you. You're not crazy, which means that whatever's happening to you is real. That's the bad news. The good news is that you're not crazy. So because this has happened probably after Whitley Strieber wrote his book Communion, which I say is probably the best written document about this, what we're calling abductions, because he goes into the disassociation, the disconnect. And finally, he calls the book Communion, where he resolves this, let's call him greater consciousness with his human consciousness, and see that has also given his life purpose. I mean, I think that's what we want, is purpose. And it's not something you actually look for. It's something that happens to you, sort of what you're going through, but we don't have to go into that. But so there's an evolution to what was called contactees. If you look at the free survey by Ray Hernandez with all these people, I have to say, when that's happened to me and I was really open to it, it sucked me down the rabbit hole. And I wanted to find out everything I could about what had happened, this strange event that had happened to me. And I went to every conference. I got to be friends. So everyone that's in this book, Nick Pope, Linda Moulton Howe, Whitley Strieber, Grant Cameron, I call them friends. We hung out, we go out to dinner, we talk about normal things. And yet there's this other phenomena that's outside the normal realm. But obviously something's going on, and the government is starting to come forward with a truth that they think, I don't know who they are to think that we're not ready for yet. Those people are not any more intelligent or evolved than anyone else. They're just have a government job, which is a little strange. So
Right. Well, and I think they're in some way thinking that they're protecting us. So
yeah, I don't really buy that, because what are they protecting us from? Ourselves? They're not protecting us from anything, really. There's nothing really to protect ourselves from. I mean, basically. So yeah, that's what's been come down about that, but it's not true. It's not true.
So I want to take this on a different tangent. So
Anywhere you want to go. Yeah.
here at Enlightened World Network, we do an awful lot of work with angels.
Angels?
Angels. Yep. And it's been kind of fascinating, as you and I were talking earlier. My conversation with you earlier has brought up more questions than answers, which is great because I love growing and learning. In one of my meditations, I was taken to a place, and I work with Archangel Michael and Archangel Raphael an awful lot. And I was taken to this place, and I was told that it was the land between lifetimes. And what I was looking at was this vast room of souls, and what they look like to me is like blobs of light, if you will. And I could tell that there were like different shades of gray, different shades of white. And what I was told was that there were these were all souls that had not been in a life, in a body before.
Right.
And some of them were purely human. And some of them were combination of human and angel. Some of them were human and otherworldly. What I don't like the term aliens, I use otherworldly. ET.
Yeah, I like that term too, yes.
And some of them were a combination of all three. And I said, and so what am I? And they said, oh, you're a combination of all three. And so, I've been trying to kind of let that sink in, and I still am not sure exactly what that means. But I've spoken to friends here that will say, I know I'm a combination. I'm otherworldly and human, and they will say I don't have any past lives that I'm aware of, and I don't really feel like I fit in here. And I think we would be surprised, or not, to know there are folks here that are otherworldly. They're a hybrid. And first of all, what do you think about that?
Well, I just want to ask you, did you see the movie Soul? Did you see that movie on Netflix?
I did. Yes.
Anyway, just reminded me of what you saw as these blobs and these lights. But I think there's so much more to levels of reality and interdimensionality that this is the simplest we're looking, and this is the baseline. But there are angels, there are ETs, there's
otherworldly
beings, there's interdimensional, there's time travelers, there's frequencies that exist right around us. There's so much right here. So yeah, I think angels are real. I think they are beings that probably haven't had lifetimes, in density. A teacher I I had says angels are always thinking that the sunrise means enlightenment. They're always optimistic. And I've interviewed Lorna Byrne. Have you ever interviewed her? She is one of my favorites. She is a real visionary. She sees archangels around people all the time. She's seeing a level of reality that most people can't see. So there's those beings that are probably assisting us whenever we're really in need, and watching us. And of course, there's ancestors that have passed over. I feel my father around sometimes. So, consciousness is so diverse and so varied in its frequencies of presence that I think you can be an off-world being. You maybe had many lifetimes off-world. That's why you're working with those beings now, because a part of your basic fundamental nature is to have aspects of tap into those other worlds. So, and maybe we have been angels for other people in some in between lifetime, that karmic connection with those beings. And so the world is a lot more complex and varied. And this is part of the cosmology that we have to have a public conversation about, beyond religion, who thinks it has all the answers. This is this. And actually, in some of the Judaic texts, they break down cherubims and this level and this level. So there may be truth to it, but what I'm sensing is that incarnation or form or manifestation is a science. There's a science. It's not belief. It's let's understand the science of form and matter and energy and life. There's a science to all of this. How do we actually get into these bodies? What is the science, and how do people leave, or how do they take their body with them into the unseen? How do they ascend their frequencies into a higher vibration? How do they get off the wheel of incarnation? And once the UFO thing can break the kind of hold of religion, because a lot of people in the government don't even want to talk about this because they think they're demons that are coming. So their worldview is not expanded enough, without too much judgment, to incorporate these other levels of reality. I think in the past, these otherworldly beings were mistaken to be angels. And doesn't mean there aren't angels there. So, or higher dimensional beings that are maybe angels or ultra terrestrials. In chapter 3, did you read that? JJ and Desiree Hurtak talk about the ultra terrestrials and the ultra celestials, which you could say are angels. So we need to open up our conscious awareness to include so much more than the narrow worldview that there's only humans and they live and they die and they're dust and nothing happens to them. And they're, consciousness is just an aspect of the brain. And, there's many people who, like Eben Alexander, if you've ever interviewed him, who said his brain was not functioning, yet he was having visions and phenomena, and there was no brain functions. And he was a neuroscientist, a neurosurgeon. So he had to shift his reality when he came back in and said, actually, and I don't know if this is true, but he says the brain shuts out more than it includes, so there's so much more phenomena, and we narrow it down. It reminds me of an Edgar Cayce quote that he says, everybody wants to know how much of our consciousness survives death, right? Mm-hmm. That's a big question. But Edgar Cayce turns it around and says, how much of that vast, amazing consciousness survives the birth of the body, lasts. So, but where we're at now, I think, as an enlightened world, is starting to access more neural nets of awareness to include these other realities. If you do Joe Dispenza's work, he's just really talked about these other beings that seem to be in the room when people are accessing their higher potential. And so that's also really what making contact is about. It's making contact with more of ourselves, more of each other, more of your capacities, Ruth, in your healing work. It's like you're making contact. We're all making contact with an expanded version of humanity. And this is what's so exciting about the threshold of possibility that we sit on. So that's the real preparation. What's the bigger realities? I call my program New Realities because I've always wondered, and I always suspected there was something more. So I've looked for people who have given me that awareness that there is more than we've been told. And people like Bruce Lipton, Nassim Haramein, who else? Like Alex Gray, the artist, he shows us these other worlds in these visionary paintings. It's like when I first heard about ascension, I said, if this is really true, then I want to have a vision of it. And I went into this art gallery and saw this picture of these beings turning into light in Alex Gray's paintings. And I said, oh, wow, that was my vision. It wasn't as a vision like people have vision. It was actually right there. That was the vision that came to me in this form. So the world is not what we think it is. It's not what we suspect it is. It's always giving us more than, in a way, we've asked for.
Right, so much more expansive. So, and I've got so many questions I would love
Okay, sure. Ask me.
But I'm going to end with this one. How do we know whether the beings, well, first let me just say, beings do not always come on ships, right? You can experience it in dreams. You can experience otherworldly beings in meditation. They don't always show up on a ship. So I guess let's just broaden that right here. Right. And secondly, how do you know? I mean, I think if people could go, yes, bring them in, it's all going to be fabulous. They are all benevolent, all wanting the best for the earth. How do we know that that's true? I think maybe that might be part of people's fear is, can they be trusted? Are they in this for our best interest?
Well, it's like people. I'm sure a lot of people we meet are not all good, but they're not all bad. Maybe some want to sell you something. Maybe somebody wants something, it's like, and then you meet people that are genuinely, want to help or be your friend or whatever. Right. And I think there's so many different types of these otherworldly beings, and many of them have their own agenda. Yes, some that are taking genetics are doing it because maybe they've reached the end of their evolutionary cycle and need what we have. Right. So yeah, they're not all good, but like people, it's a vibration. I think we're hoping to practice awareness enough so you can tell if you meet someone and you really don't want to hang out with them. You just get a feeling. It's a vibration. It's like, okay, some people are not where you want to be, some beings off-world beings. So it's like, are you feeling love? Are you feeling connection? Do you feel like there's a two-way relationship here? You don't want to have a relationship with people that you don't feel like it's a two-way. So it's like that. It's a next level of discernment. If you're getting really weird feelings, doesn't mean they're bad necessarily, but it could mean that they're not at the frequency where you want to hang out. So this is why it's so important to have a public conversation about this, because we have to say there's not just one beings that are here to help us and lift us up. Although I do think they've stopped us from blowing ourselves up many, many times. They seem to hang out around nuclear weapons. They've done demonstrations, turning off the nuclear codes at military bases in the US and in Russia or Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. So they are, for the most part, looking out for our best interests, I think. So that's one of the reasons that Robert Hastings' quote comes, they don't want to show up and freak people out. They're coming and going. And there might be some other beings that are just here for as a service to self, but right. But I think most people you meet and we meet, maybe they're here because they're seeing the bigger picture. And, we are part of a bigger picture. When we blow up a nuclear weapon, that's like ripping holes in time, space. And it's like that alerts the rest of the local universe, local galaxy. Uh-oh. And I love this expression. The teenagers have the car keys. We better check up on them. And, So we, because of our violent, warlike nature, and which probably has a ripple effect on the rest of the cosmos, we're like a splinter in the small toe that you can't sleep with until you get it out, or until we are in a time now where if we really want to evolve and meet the rest of the universe that are knocking at our door, we have to change the fundamental behaviors of how we are with each other. I studied with Marshall Rosenberg, and he says the worst violence, nonviolent communication, he teaches, that NDC. He says the worst violence, and he was trying to negotiate between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but he said the worst violence he has seen is between husbands and wives and parents and children. It's like we have to clean up this very primitive part of ourselves, and which is looking at our dark side and looking at where we kind of go unconscious. I'm looking at that, and it's like we have to get our individual acts together, even for an enlightened world. That has to happen. And so we put away your weapons sort of mentality. Do we really need guns? I mean, I know there's a lot of people who think yes, but I don't think anyone really needs a gun. Not police, not army. I think we have to create a nonviolent world, because these beings don't want to hang out with any creatures whose favorite pastime for the past 5,000 or 10,000 years have been tribal warfare. That's what we've been involved with. So we have to come to a higher level of understanding if we're really going to meet these otherworldly beings, and make peace with them and ourselves, and see that there's really an enlightened world that is possible.
So we do need to close.
Okay.
I want to thank you, Alan, so much for coming on. Making Contact is available on Amazon, and you are providing so much information on your show, New Realities. People can find it on YouTube. And just watching your shows with all of the different guest speakers that you have, folks can learn so much. So please be paying attention to Alan Steinfeld. Thank you so much for being here.
People can get the book on Amazon. It's up on Kindle. It's on audiobook. It's on a regular book. So it's a great read. It's very exciting. And it's about change. It's about being at the threshold of an unknown. So thank you, Ruth, for being so open and aware of bigger possibilities. And let's do this more. Let's talk about making contact as an expansion of our consciousness. So I'm very curious in what you think about all this. So
I've got lots of questions and lots to say. Thank you, friends, for being here. Take good care of yourselves. God bless. We'll see you soon.